Between 1719 and 1722, a single pirate captain captured more than 400 ships across two oceans. Not Blackbeard, not Henry Morgan, not any of the names Hollywood turned into Halloween costumes. His name was Bartholomew Roberts. The sailors who survived him called him Black Bart, and the ship he commanded, a vessel he renamed the Royal Fortune, became the most feared warship in the Atlantic world. Not because it was the biggest, not because it carried the most guns, but because the man standing on its quarterdeck was smarter, faster, and more ruthless than every naval officer sent to stop him. The British Royal Navy deployed entire squadrons to hunt him down. Colonial governors offered bounties that could buy a plantation. Merchant companies rerouted entire trade fleets just to avoid the waters he sailed. And for 3 years, none of it worked. So how did a reluctant Welsh sailor, a man who never wanted to be a pirate in the first place, become the most successful one who ever lived? And how did one ship, renamed 4 separate times, terrorize a stretch of ocean that spans from Brazil to West Africa? To understand that, we need to start with a map. Picture the Atlantic Ocean in 1719. On the western side, you've got the Caribbean, the coast of the American colonies stretching from New England down to the Carolinas, and further south, the Portuguese colonies of Brazil. On the eastern side, the bulging coast of West Africa, where the slave trade funnels human cargo through fortified ports along the Gold Coast, the Bight of Benin, and the Niger Delta. Now draw a line between them. That line is the Atlantic Trade Triangle. Ships loaded with manufactured goods sail from Europe to Africa. In Africa, those goods are traded for enslaved people who are packed into ships bound for the Caribbean and the Americas. In the colonies, sugar, tobacco, rum, and raw materials fill those same ships for the return voyage to Europe. Every leg of that triangle is money, staggering, world-shaping money. And every leg of that triangle is vulnerable, because these merchant vessels loaded to the waterline with cargo worth fortunes are slow, lightly armed, and crewed by men who are paid almost nothing. That triangle was Black Bart's hunting ground, and the Royal Fortune was the predator that patrolled it. But Bartholomew Roberts didn't start as a predator. He started as prey. Born in 1682 in the village of Casnewid Bach in Pembrokeshire, Wales, John Roberts grew up in a world where the sea was the only way out of poverty. Wales in the late 1600s offered 2 futures for a boy without land or title. You could work the fields until your back gave out, or you could go to sea and hope the ocean didn't kill you before you earned enough to come home. Roberts chose the sea. By his mid-30s, he was an experienced merchant sailor, competent enough to serve as third mate aboard a slave trading vessel called the Princess. It wasn't glamorous work. Slave ships were floating nightmares, packed with disease, death, and the screams of people chained below deck. But it paid, and Roberts was good at navigation, good at reading weather, and good at keeping his mouth shut. In June of 1719, the Princess was anchored at Anamabu on the Gold Coast of West Africa, loading its human cargo for the crossing to the Americas. Roberts was 37 years old. He'd spent more than 2 decades at sea. He was tired, underpaid, and watching younger officers get promoted over him because they had connections he didn't. That's when the pirates came. A brigantine flying no colors swept into the harbor and opened fire. The ship belonged to Captain Howell Davis, a Welsh pirate who'd been terrorizing the West African coast for months. Davis and his crew overwhelmed the Princess, captured everyone aboard, and gave Roberts the same choice every captured sailor received. Join us, or we leave you here with nothing. Roberts didn't want to join. He said so openly. According to accounts from the period, he told Davis that piracy was a vile trade. But he also recognized something that every honest sailor in 1719 already knew. The legitimate maritime world treated its sailors like disposable tools. Pay was miserable, conditions were brutal, officers beat crewmen for sport, and if you survived 20 years of it, you got nothing. Not a pension, not a word of thanks, not a single guarantee that old age wouldn't find you starving on a dock somewhere. Pirates, on the other hand, voted on their captains. They split plunder equally. They had articles, written agreements that guaranteed every man a share and a voice. It wasn't freedom in any romantic sense. But compared to the floating prisons of the merchant marine, it was the closest thing to democracy that existed on the open water. Roberts joined, not out of enthusiasm, out of math. And within 6 weeks, that decision changed the entire Atlantic world. Howell Davis was a competent pirate, but he was also reckless. In July of 1719, barely a month after Roberts joined the crew, Davis attempted to kidnap the governor of the Portuguese island of Principe off the coast of West Africa. The plan went wrong. Portuguese soldiers ambushed Davis and his landing party. Davis was shot through the stomach and died on the beach. The crew was stunned. They'd lost their captain in a foolish land raid, and now they were anchored off a hostile island with Portuguese guns pointed at them. They needed a new leader immediately. The vote happened fast, and against every expectation, including his own, Bartholomew Roberts won. Why? Because in 6 weeks the crew had noticed something about the quiet Welshman. He didn't drink, he didn't brawl, he didn't make rash decisions. But when Davis asked for navigation advice, Roberts always had the right answer. When storms hit, Roberts stayed calm. When other men panicked, Roberts calculated. One crew member reportedly said that if they were going to have a pirate captain, it was better to have a man of courage and skill at their head than one who simply wanted to fight. Roberts accepted the captaincy with a line that would define the next 3 years. He said, more or less, that since he'd dipped his hands in muddy water and had to be a pirate, it was better to be a commander than a common man. His first act as captain was revenge. He turned the ship back toward Principe, bombarded the Portuguese fort, and raided the town in retaliation for Davis's death. The message was clear. This new captain did not forget, and he did not forgive. Then he pointed the ship west toward the richest hunting grounds on earth. Roberts crossed the Atlantic and arrived in the waters off Brazil in September of 1719. At the time, Portuguese merchant convoys gathered in the harbor of Bajia, loading sugar, gold, and tobacco for the voyage back to Lisbon. These convoys traveled under naval escort, dozens of merchant ships guarded by warships bristling with cannons. Any sane pirate would have avoided a fleet like that. Roberts sailed straight into it. He arrived at Bajia and found a convoy of 42 Portuguese merchant ships sitting in the harbor, waiting for their escort warships to arrive. The warships were late. The merchants were unprotected. Roberts didn't attack all 42. He was bold, not stupid. He pulled alongside the largest vessel, a ship carrying a fortune in sugar, tobacco, animal hides, and a chest containing 40,000 gold moidores, Portuguese coins worth a staggering sum. He took the cargo, transferred what he wanted to his own vessel, and slipped out of the harbor before the escort arrived. 42 ships in the harbor. He robbed the richest one, and he was gone before anyone could organize a response. The Portuguese were humiliated. The colonial governor of Bajia was reportedly so furious that he sent 2 warships after Roberts immediately. They never found him. This was the pattern that would define Roberts's entire career: speed, precision, and almost insulting confidence. He didn't want to fight naval battles. He wanted to appear, take what was valuable, and vanish. And he was about to get the ship that would make that pattern unstoppable. Between late 1719 and early 1720, Roberts cycled through several captured vessels, upgrading each time he found something faster or better armed. Pirates didn't build ships. They stole them. And a pirate captain's reputation often depended on the quality of the vessel under him. Roberts understood this better than anyone. He was obsessive about his ships. He wanted speed because a fast ship could run from naval vessels it couldn't outgun. He wanted firepower because merchant captains surrendered faster when they saw rows of cannon ports staring at them. And he wanted intimidation because the more terrifying the ship looked, the fewer fights he actually had to win. Every ship he commanded, he renamed the Royal Fortune. The name itself was a message. It mocked the legitimate world. It told every merchant captain that the real fortune The Royal Fortune belonged to whoever was bold enough to take it. The most famous Royal Fortune, the one that became legend, was a French warship Roberts captured in 1721. It was a large vessel carrying 40 guns, fast enough to chase down merchantmen and powerful enough to trade broadsides with smaller naval ships. Roberts modified it extensively. He added more guns, reinforced the hull, and flew a custom flag that showed him standing on two skulls, one labeled ABH for a Barbadian's head and the other AMH for a Martinican's head. Both islands had tried to capture him. Both had failed. The flag was his way of reminding them. When the Royal Fortune appeared on the horizon, most merchant captains didn't even try to run. They struck their colors and surrendered immediately. Fighting Black Bart's ship was a death sentence, but surrendering usually meant you kept your life. Roberts was ruthless with cargo, but he rarely killed cooperative captains. The ones who resisted, though, received a very different treatment. What made the Royal Fortune so effective wasn't just the ship itself. It was the system Roberts built around it. Most pirate captains operated alone, a single ship roaming the seas, grabbing what it could. Roberts ran a fleet. At his peak, he commanded a small squadron of vessels, with the Royal Fortune as the flagship and smaller, faster sloops serving as scouts and pursuit ships. If a merchant convoy scattered when they spotted the Royal Fortune, the sloops ran down the stragglers. Roberts also maintained strict discipline aboard his ships, something that set him apart from virtually every other pirate captain of the era. He created a set of articles, a written code of conduct, that every crew member had to sign before joining. These articles were remarkable for their time. Every man got a vote in affairs of the moment. Every man got an equal share of provisions and fresh plunder. Gambling for money with cards or dice was forbidden aboard ship. Lights and candles had to be out by 8 at night. Every man had to keep his weapons clean and ready for service. No women were allowed aboard. Any man who deserted during battle would be punished by death or marooning. Disputes between crew members were settled on shore, not aboard ship. And the most unusual rule of all, musicians were given Sundays off. These articles weren't written for fun. They were written because Roberts understood something that most pirate captains didn't. A crew that feels treated fairly fights harder. A crew with clear rules has fewer internal conflicts. A ship with discipline can outperform a ship with twice the guns. The Royal Fortune wasn't just a weapon. It was a floating organization with a management structure that most legitimate companies of the era couldn't match. Roberts himself was an anomaly among pirates. In an age when pirate captains were defined by their drinking, their violence, and their unpredictability, Roberts was controlled, disciplined, and almost aristocratic in his personal habits. He didn't drink alcohol. In an era when rum was practically the blood supply of every ship afloat, Roberts preferred tea. He dressed extravagantly, wearing a crimson damask waistcoat, a red feather in his hat, and a diamond-studded gold cross that hung around his neck, a piece he'd stolen from the Portuguese royal governor's ship during one of his raids. Crew members said he looked more like a nobleman than a pirate. He was also deeply pragmatic about violence. Roberts understood that reputation was more valuable than cannon fire. The more terrifying the stories about Black Bart became, the fewer ships actually fought him. So he cultivated that reputation carefully. When a merchant captain cooperated, Roberts treated him with something resembling courtesy. When a captain resisted, Roberts made an example of him, burning the ship, marooning the crew, or worse. The balance was deliberate. Be generous enough that surrender seems smart. Be brutal enough that resistance seems suicidal. It worked. By 1720, Roberts was capturing ships at a rate no pirate in history had ever achieved. Some estimates suggest he took over 400 vessels in just 3 years. The number is almost absurd. It means he was averaging more than 2 ships per week. The Caribbean was in chaos. The West African coast was paralyzed. Insurance rates for merchant vessels crossing the Atlantic skyrocketed. The entire economic engine of the colonial world was being disrupted by one man and one ship, and the Royal Navy had no idea how to stop him. The problem the Royal Navy faced was simple to describe and nearly impossible to solve: The Atlantic Ocean is enormous. Even with dozens of warships patrolling trade routes, finding a single pirate vessel in that expanse was like searching for a needle in a field of haystacks. Roberts made it worse by never staying in one area for long. He'd terrorize the Caribbean for a few months, then cross the Atlantic to raid the African coast. By the time the Navy deployed ships to the Caribbean, Roberts was already 3,000 miles away, hitting slave ships off the Gold Coast. When they sent ships to Africa, he'd cross back to the Americas and raid the fishing fleets off Newfoundland. In June of 1720, Roberts sailed north and hit the fishing fleet at Trepassey, Newfoundland. He captured 22 vessels in the harbor and terrorized the settlement so thoroughly that the colonial government sent panicked letters to London begging for protection. Then he turned south again, sweeping through the Caribbean, taking ship after ship. He hit Barbados, he hit Martinique. Both islands sent armed vessels after him. Both failed. Roberts was so insulted by their attempts that he redesigned his flag to include the two skulls labeled ABH and AMH, a permanent reminder of their humiliation. By late 1720, Roberts was operating with near impunity. Governors were sending furious dispatches to London. Merchant companies were demanding action. The Admiralty was embarrassed. One of the most powerful navies in the world was being made to look foolish by a Welsh tea drinker in a red coat. Something had to change. In early 1721, the Admiralty gave Captain Challoner Ogle command of HMS Swallow, a 60-gun warship, and HMS Weymouth, a 50-gun vessel. Ogle's orders were specific. Find Bartholomew Roberts. End his career, by any means necessary. Ogle was not a fool, and he understood what previous commanders had failed to grasp. You couldn't chase Roberts across the open ocean. The man was too fast, too unpredictable, and too smart to be caught in open water. You had to figure out where he was going next and be there waiting for him. Ogle studied Roberts's patterns. He noticed that Roberts always returned to the West African coast. The slave trade was simply too profitable to ignore. Ships loaded with gold, ivory, and trade goods were concentrated along a relatively short stretch of coastline. For a pirate, West Africa was like a fully stocked buffet with no security guard. Ogle sailed for Africa, and he waited. Roberts, meanwhile, was having the most productive stretch of his entire career. Throughout 1721, he ravaged the West African coast. He captured slave ships, Royal African Company vessels, and merchant traders with such frequency that legitimate trade along the Gold Coast effectively stopped. The Royal African Company, one of the most powerful commercial entities in the British Empire, was losing so much money to Roberts that its shareholders were demanding military intervention. Roberts captured a French warship during this period and turned it into the final, most powerful royal fortune: 40 guns, a reinforced hull, enough speed to outrun most naval vessels, and enough firepower to outfight the ones that caught him. He was at the height of his power, and he knew it. But power breeds complacency, and Roberts, for all his discipline, was beginning to make small mistakes. He stayed in the same waters for too long. He allowed his crew to grow too large, which meant more mouths to feed and more need for constant raiding. And he underestimated the determination of the man hunting him. By January of 1722, Ogle had tracked Roberts to the coast of present-day Gabon. Intelligence from captured sailors and terrified merchants pointed to Cape Lopez, a cape on the western coast where Roberts had been spotted anchoring to careen his ships. Careening was essential maintenance. Pirates had to regularly haul their vessels onto beaches to scrape barnacles and marine growth from the hulls. A fouled hull slowed a ship dramatically. And for a pirate who depended on speed, careening was a matter of survival. But careening also made a ship vulnerable. While the hull was being scraped, the ship was essentially defenseless. If an enemy arrived during careening, the pirates couldn't run and couldn't fight. Ogle knew this, and he was closing in. On February 5, 1722, Ogle found Roberts's fleet anchored at Cape Lopez. Roberts had 3 ships: the Royal Fortune, a consort vessel called the Great Ranger, and a smaller sloop. The Great Ranger was at anchor, its crew recovering from a night of heavy drinking after capturing a merchant ship the day before. Ogle made a tactical decision that showed exactly why the Admiralty had chosen him for this mission. Instead of attacking the entire fleet at once, he deliberately separated them. He sailed the Swallow past the Cape, making it look like he was a fleeing merchant vessel. The Great Ranger took the bait. The captain of the Great Ranger, a pirate named James Skyrim, ordered pursuit. His crew, many of them still drunk from the previous night's celebration, stumbled to their stations and gave chase. Ogle led them around the Cape and out of sight of Roberts and the Royal Fortune. Then he turned the Swallow around and opened fire. The battle was vicious but short. The Great Ranger's crew was hungover, disorganized, and outgunned. HMS Swallow carried 60 guns. After a brutal exchange, the Great Ranger was dismasted and crippled. Skyrim was wounded so badly that he asked his crew to throw him overboard rather than be captured. They refused, and the surviving pirates surrendered. Ogle had eliminated 1/3 of Roberts's fleet without the pirate captain even knowing it happened. 3 days later, on February 10, 1722, Ogle came back for the Royal Fortune. The morning of February 10th was overcast, with a low haze sitting over the water at Cape Lopez. Roberts had noticed that the Great Ranger hadn't returned, but he wasn't overly concerned. Ships separated from the fleet all the time, chasing prizes or riding out weather. He expected Skyrim to return within days. Then a sail appeared through the haze. Roberts studied it. The approaching vessel looked like a merchant ship. It was flying no naval colors. Roberts, still confident and still believing his reputation would carry the day, decided to engage. It was HMS Swallow. Roberts dressed for battle as he always did. The crimson damask waistcoat, the red feather in his hat, the diamond cross around his neck. He looked like a man going to a ball, not a battle. The crew of the Royal Fortune was in rough shape. Like the Great Ranger's crew, many of them had been drinking heavily. Some accounts suggest that a significant portion of the crew was still drunk when the Swallow opened fire. Roberts was furious. His own articles prohibited exactly this kind of indiscipline, but enforcing rules became harder as the crew grew larger and the victories came easier. Despite the crew's condition, Roberts attempted to execute a classic pirate maneuver. He tried to sail the Royal Fortune directly past the Swallow, using speed and positioning to escape into open water where he could outrun the warship. If he could clear the Swallow's broadside and reach open ocean, the Royal Fortune's speed would carry him to safety. It almost worked. Roberts stood on the deck, directing the maneuver, when the Swallow fired a broadside of grape shot. Grape shot was a cluster of small iron balls that spread like a shotgun blast, designed to kill crew members rather than damage the ship. A spray of grape shot struck Roberts in the throat. He died almost instantly, slumping forward over one of the ship's cannons. The crew saw their captain fall. According to survivors, several men carried his body to the rail and threw him overboard before the Navy could capture it. Roberts had reportedly told his crew that if he died in battle, he wanted to be buried at sea. They honored that wish in the middle of the fight, tossing his body, still dressed in his crimson waistcoat and diamond cross, into the Atlantic. Without Roberts, the fight collapsed. The remaining crew attempted to resist, but the ship's helmsman was too drunk to steer properly, and the Royal Fortune drifted into the Swallow's line of fire. Within hours, the battle was over. 152 pirates were captured. They were taken to Cape Coast Castle on the Gold Coast, where the largest pirate trial in history was held. 52 of them were hanged. The rest were sentenced to hard labor in the African mines, a fate many considered worse than the noose. The Royal Fortune was stripped of its guns and valuables, then left to rot. Roberts' death sent shockwaves through the pirate world that went far beyond one man or one ship. When word spread that Black Bart was dead, pirate crews across the Atlantic began to dissolve. Some surrendered voluntarily. Others scattered to remote islands and tried to disappear. The man who had made piracy look invincible had been killed by a single blast of grape shot, and suddenly the whole enterprise looked mortal. Historians generally mark February 10, 1722, the day Roberts died, as the effective end of the Golden Age of Piracy. There were still pirates after Roberts, of course. There are still pirates today. but the era of charismatic captains commanding powerful ships and challenging entire empires on the open sea. That died with him, and the irony is staggering. The most successful pirate in recorded history, the man who captured more ships than Blackbeard, Henry Morgan, and Anne Bonny combined, is barely a footnote in popular culture. Blackbeard, who captured maybe 20 ships and terrorized the seas for about 2 years, got movies, TV shows, and theme park rides. Roberts, who captured over 400 ships across 3 years and 2 oceans, got a Wikipedia article and a few paragraphs in history books. Part of the reason is that Roberts doesn't fit the pirate stereotype. He didn't drink. He didn't swagger. He wasn't wild or unpredictable. He was methodical, disciplined, and strategic. He ran his ship like a business and his fleet like a corporation. That's not as exciting as a madman with a burning beard, but it's a lot more effective. The Royal Fortune wasn't just a pirate ship. It was the flagship of the most efficient criminal enterprise of the 18th century. And the man who commanded it proved something that the colonial powers didn't want to admit. Their system was fragile, their trade routes were exposed, their navies were stretched too thin, and one motivated captain with a fast ship and a loyal crew could exploit every crack in the entire structure. Roberts proved it for 3 years. Then a blast of grapeshot ended the demonstration. His body was never recovered. The Diamond Cross was never found. And the name Royal Fortune drifted into history, attached to the ghost of a Welsh sailor who never wanted to be a pirate, but became the greatest one who ever lived. If this is the kind of history that keeps you watching, hit subscribe. I cover stories like this every week, the ones the textbooks skipped and Hollywood ignored. And if you want to know about another pirate whose story is even stranger than Black Bart's, that video is on screen right now.